Hello everyone and welcome back to Brutal Truth. Today we are continuing our Skate King series by taking a look at Tony Hawk. And yeah, I know, he's a sellout. He's not even that good, man. All he does is vert. Well, first off, that's not true at all. Tony is actually a pretty exceptional street skater. Who do you think taught Riley everything? His mom? Tony competed in the very first X Games park competition and would do so once more the following year. He also spent a few years in the 90s making a transition to street skating, and even releasing a part featuring this in the first ever video for Birdhouse Skateboards. This phase of his life would be short-lived, and while he is capable of skating street, he would soon realize that vert is quite simply his true love in skateboarding, and that he can make far more contributions to the progression of the sport from that platform.
If I want to continue to be a pro skater, I've got to stick with what I know and stick with what I'm progressive at, because no one wants to see me lip slide a 7-stair. You know what I mean? Like, that's just more because, like, well, he can, so all right. And it's just like, that's not evolving. That's not pushing the limits. That's just showing that I can do what, you know, every other average street skater can do. So for me, it was like, all right, do I want to stick with skateboarding myself, or do I want to move to being a businessman? And I love skating too much, and I knew that into my adult age, the only way I was going to keep doing it is on ramps, with knowing how to fall and knowing what I was best at. I just stuck with what I knew and saw it through. Here I am on my $1 million vert ramp talking to you.
Yeah, you made the right call.
He has also released footage from multiple secret skate park tours, as he calls them. And while yes, I understand that this is not technically considered street, the point is that he is displaying the skills necessary to skate far more than a vert ramp well into his later years. So yeah, now that is settled, y'all need to start putting a little bit more respect on the Birdman. No, the real Birdman. No, the Birdman! Not to mention the fact that prior to Tony, there was no such thing as making a living from skateboarding. Before Tony came along, the idea of a rich and famous skateboarder did not exist. It wasn't even on anybody's radar. But what about Tony Alva, the Dogtown, the Z-Boys, meh meh meh? No. People could have cared less about any of those guys back then, and you didn't even know they existed until that movie came out. There was nothing for skateboarding in those days. They might try to make it seem glamorous for the movies and things like that now, but the reality of it is that a competition back then might have been a couple hundred people standing in a parking lot watching some kids do lame flat ground tricks that literally no one else on the planet gave a crap about, except for Rodney Mullen, because Rodney Mullen's the man. It just wasn't like it is now. There was no X Games, there was no Do Tour, and Street League hadn't even been thought possible yet because Rob Dyrdek was still in the 4th grade. Tony Hawk was the first one to ever do it. He changed everything and showed everyone that from there on out, a career in skateboarding was a possibility.
Tony paved the way. You know, it's like he's the first true millionaire, mainstream skateboarder that showed the world and especially our industry, like, hey, it's possible to elevate to the mainstream.
But it wasn't always that way for him. And even though everyone wants to act as if he has just had everything handed to him, Tony has had to struggle for acceptance since day one. Everyone saw him as just some wimpy kid, even within the skateboarding world. Other pros hated him. They thought that he didn't represent skateboarding in the way that it should be, and that the tricks he did were way too gimmicky.
Well, the early stage of my career, like I said, it was hard because I was doing a sport that was already considered an outcast activity. It was like the furthest thing from cool you could do when I started. And then my style was not the cool style, so I was an outcast in an outcast activity. And so I learned to ignore haters early on, which really, I think, set the tone for me in terms of forging my own way in business and like even in social media. Like, you know, people, they go in social media and their souls are crushed from the hate and the comments. And I'm like, I had that to my face when I was 13. Like, I'm good. You can't hide behind your username.
Dwayne Peters literally spit in Tony's face. He hated him so much. But it's all good now because Dwayne's so rad he doesn't even remember doing it.
I used to do that a lot. I can't remember that particular moment.
And by rad, I mean missing way too many brain cells.
Slamming my mic into my fucking one tooth I got left.
This guy struggled every step of the way, and not just to be accepted as a legitimate skater, but to be accepted as a person in general. Then when the day finally came that he was so good they were forced to recognize his abilities, and the money started to flow in, then he started to get taken advantage of.
That's when I made my most mistakes in terms of learning, like, not to allow people to just use my name and likeness, because I signed a contract and they gave me a paycheck. Yeah. Luckily, it was the 80s and was somewhat forgivable, and YouTube didn't exist then. So
right. Let's talk about some of those mistakes, and not from just like what you did wrong, but maybe in hindsight, so you can kind of share insights with people who.
Well, I gave one company who was licensing. They used to do like these keychain skateboards, and I didn't know any better, so I just signed their contract, and they gave me a upfront money and royalties. But then they just started making anything and everything that they wanted with logos I'd never even seen before, with my name. Really junky products anyway, but at the same time, I just didn't like the aesthetic of it. And I came to them and I said, you guys can't make this logo's terrible. This is a ripoff of this other company anyway. And they're like, yeah, we can. You sign the paperwork.
And at the very height of his popularity, literally the bottom dropped out of the entire skateboard industry. And for years, no one cared about a skateboard at all. And it would be the actions that Tony took during this slump that would change the perception of skateboarding in the public eye forever. When everyone else was trying to get out of the skateboard industry, Tony was diving headfirst into starting a brand new company and doing everything he could to get all the rights to his name and likeness back into his control. He knew that eventually the popularity would come back around, and when it did, he would already have an established company, and that by sticking with it through the bad, when the time came for the good, he would be the one to stand on top of the mountain.
It was fun, but it was hard for the first 4 years, 5 years, because skating was just down.
Yeah.
And if you're a little company, you're really hurting.
Yeah. It's cyclical, though.
Well, that's what we believed.
Yeah.
And that's why I started it then. I said,
Yeah.
if we start a company now, when skating's at its deadest point, we're going to make a mark in skating now.
Yep.
And then if it starts to rise again, we're already sitting up here as a recognized brand.
I'm so glad that like our audience got to hear you say that. Because now they understand like how you build a brand. You've got to be unafraid of the winter to know that you'll reach the summer.
Yeah.
And
well, and now, I mean, if you want to start a brand now, it would be that much harder to rise above everything else. It's possible.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to work that much harder at it.
And that's exactly what he did. And by then, he had learned from the mistakes he had made in his first run in the spotlight. He made better investments this time around and was turning Birdhouse Skateboards into a very successful business. Then with the birth of the X Games, skating continued to grow bigger and bigger. And at this event in 1999, something special would happen. After 50 years of progression in skateboarding, Tony would become the very first man on Earth to land a 900. This would not only solidify his name in history forever, but also turn him into the literal face of skateboarding for years to come. This would give Tony a level of fame he had never dreamed of and allow him access to things no skater had had before. He would acquire mainstream sponsors like Mountain Dew, McDonald's, and even car companies like Jeep, which would ascend skateboarding into being a household commodity. Unless you lived under a rock, you knew who Tony Hawk was. Ironically, these same actions that would transform skateboarding into being one of the most popular action sports on the planet would also be the same reasons that Tony acquired a reputation for being a sellout, due to his acceptance of sponsors like Bagel Bites.
Where'd he go? Whoa, Tony Hawk.
With Bagel Bites, you can have the taste of chewy, cheesy pepperoni pizza anytime.
Excuse me, Mr. Hawk. Could you, share?
No way.
Bagel Bites, now!
I mean, people were calling me Bagel Boy for a while.
But the reality of it is that had he not done those things and given skateboarding the exposure that he did, it would have never become what it is today. And Tony, of all people, can teach you a very valuable lesson on those that want to refer to you as a sellout for simply doing well in life.
I've had signature equipment with my name on it since I was 14 years old, right? It was not selling. So it certainly wasn't selling out. And so what I've learned through this, and I'm sure people have heard me say it before, you only get called a sellout when people buy your stuff. You know, you get called a sellout when your stuff finally sells. That's it. Like, and is that bad? Like, do you think that I've changed my tune or my motivation because I make money? Hell no. Look, this ramp right here cost me $600,000 right here. And it is my best thing I've ever bought. I skate this thing almost every day, you know, and it really has been one of the best things in my life. Like, just the fact that I still get to skate.
Tony brought skateboarding to the masses and changed it from being an activity that only kids participate in to a sport in which people can build careers out of, and that is now widely accepted and supported. There is an entire episode of The Point on GameSpot dedicated to nothing but how Tony turned an entire generation of gamers into skaters through his Tony Hawk Pro Skater video game. I mean, come on, his first board will be forever immortalized in the Smithsonian Museum because even they realize how important Tony is.
Hi, I'm Tony Hawk. My new game is all about choice. Win over sponsors, cut your own skate videos, modify the game environment, skate check pedestrians, nail the manual.
I'm Tony Hawk.
I can do the 900. I'm the Birdman. I got my own commercial.
You guys, are you kidding me? I'm right here.
Tony Hawk's Proving Ground. Every skater has a story. Create yours.
Oh, man, that's too bad. Hey, we should go crap in someone's soup.
But not only do we owe the popularity and success of skating to Tony, but also the progression of the sport in general. He invented countless tricks, started tons of events and tours, and it is also a great possibility that without him we may have never had such great skaters as Andrew Reynolds and Shaun White, considering Tony is the one who found them. It is also possible that Steve Berra may have never remained in popularity as long as he has without Tony.
Steve was living in my house. He basically moved from Nebraska to my house. I was his really provider for everything in terms of finances, of food, and shelter.
Honestly, he was the most gracious person I've ever met. He let me drive his car. He gave me his gas card. I love Tony. He's done probably more for me than really anyone in my whole life.
And without Steve Berra, there would be no Barracks. And if there were no Barracks, then the new generation of skaters like Cody WHITT may have never gained the attention that they have. Do you see what I'm getting at here? P.S. Go watch my Cody WHITT video. Dude's gnarly. Had it not been for Tony Hawk, there is no telling where skateboarding would be right now. That is something that we should always recognize and that we should never take for granted. I hope that this video has shown you a new side of Tony, and that maybe you have a new appreciation for his career and his contributions to the skateboarding community, so that the next time you hear someone call Tony Hawk a sellout, you punch them right in the face. Just joking, kids. Don't fight. Just show them this video instead. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave suggestions in the comments of who else you would like to hear about in this series, as well as any other video ideas you would enjoy seeing in the future. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, tell your mom, tell your dad, hell, tell your mailman, I don't care. Tell everyone you know that here at Brutal Truth, you'll get the opinions you won't hear anywhere else.